In 1974, Britain was gripped by economic crisis. It was also the first year of the miners' strike, and it was also the year that a young lad was making his way south from Bradford to Newmarket, Mark Holmes.
Now then, John, how are you?
How you doing? All right. Inside the Mind with Mark Holmes.
Yeah.
Seems a lifetime ago now, Mark.
To be fair, actually, John, 1974, yeah, it does. You know, if you think about it realistically, it's 36 years. And that really worries me.
Yeah.
Because it actually makes me realise that I've been at this game a long, long time.
So tell me about the early part of your journey then, Mark.
Well, like I've just said, John, in 1974, I suppose you could say I was conventionally coarse fishing for carp.
Yeah.
You know, as a young lad, no money, very small amount of tackle, and basically brought up on a diet of float fishing for fish. But there was a pivotal moment that actually changed the old psyche, and that was when I got a copy of Still Water Angling by Richard Walker.
By Richard Walker, beautiful. Yeah, I mean, how did that change you? What was you, 12 at the time or something? Or?
When I got the book, I was 13. It was
13.
1975. I'd caught carp, as I said to you, by chasing them around this farm pond, float fishing Brandlins. And it's so funny looking back. If I give the viewers, an understanding that the float I was using was a peacock quill, and I never forget, it was cocked by 4 dust shot.
Really?
4 dust shot.
Yeah.
Cocked it. So I was fishing literally under the rod tip for these fish. And of course then I started to catch carp. And I think my biggest at the time was 4.5, but my first carp was a wilder.
Yeah.
And that always makes me smile when people go on about saving, you know, the carp in this country. People seem to have forgotten about the poor wilder. We let that just go down the drain.
Yeah,
and I think
sure.
that's because it was sizes, because you never got a double figure.
Double
but let's
figure.
not go there. You know? But
Yeah.
but the reality is that, you know, I took an interest in carp, and it's from then that I got still water angling.
Yeah. I mean, why do you think it was carp? Do you think that's because they were bigger? You know, I mean, ironically enough, we fished the same pond. We lived in the same town.
Yeah,
I was from Lancashire, of course, lost my accent. And you was from Yorkshire.
Yeah.
I mean, our journeys, and now
Yeah.
we don't live that far away in the Midlands either, do we?
No.
You're stalking me.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. Although I've got hasten to add, I was on that pond before you.
Yeah, you were. You just got the nod on me there. But yeah. So why carp? I mean, was it because obviously you've hooked a couple, the fight? You know what it's like as a kid. You're catching a few ounce roach. Next thing you're into a 3-pound carp. You go home and tell your mum and dad that you've had the world record, don't you?
Yeah, it was exactly that, John. I mean, you know, without boring people too much, my actual first fishing experiences were on River Calder in Elland in West Yorkshire, catching 6-ounce roach, and so 2 and 3 pound carp were very big fish.
Yeah.
And again, for the younger people out there, and anybody who's on this journey, they will know that it is the size of the carp that initially gets you hooked, because it's simply bigger and stronger and fights harder than anything else you've ever caught at that time.
Yeah.
So I always say to people, when they talk about pivotal moments in people's carp fishing journeys, the first capture for anybody of a carp is always a pivotal moment, just as your first 20, your first 30, 40, 50, 60, 100 pound, whatever it is. There's always one pivotal point, and I've likened catching my first carp to the birth of my children, to passing my driving test.
Yeah, of course.
To, you know, it is a point where
you can never go back and do it again, can you? It's
No.
a one-time thing in your life, isn't it?
And of course, very much like you know, like anything you get a buzz from, whether it's chemically induced or naturally induced, which is carp fishing to me, you want to try and go back there. And the Stillwater Angling was a book that became my Bible, because here was a man that told me I could get it anytime I went fishing. Because I'd been brought up with my father, who was a match angler, who said that carp were mystique, and you couldn't catch them, they weren't catchable.
But they were to an extent them days though, weren't they? That's the truth of the matter. Is people watching at home now, you know, the modern day scene, you know, there's carp everywhere you look. Every piece of blue, when you look on Google, there's carp now. But it just wasn't like that then, was it?
Well, it wasn't, and what people again tend to forget, that it wasn't until 1974 that you could actually physically buy carp from a fish farm.
Yeah.
And they were imports. So what that means is that any carp that was stocked before 1974 were imports. So any club, which primarily is what they were that did stocking, that wanted to stock carp, had to really search for them. So the reality is that they weren't stocked.
Yeah.
So what you got a large mixed fishery, where there were perhaps, if you were lucky, 6 to a dozen carp.
Yeah, sure.
So unless you were of a mind, and there were a few around, but they were very, very single-minded, generally carp were hooked by accident rather than by design.
By design.
And I think the key shift in what Walker did was he actually told people, listen, you can fish for them by design rather than accident.
So tell me, we've got a young lad, 14, attending Newmarket Upper School. I mean, every young lad sets off, well, especially in our era, you know, you was birds nesting, you was out, you know, biking, climbing trees, catching fish. I mean, Mark Holmes, in terms of your journey, what did it go from just a hobby, you know, fishing Ashley Pond, a little pond, catching a few pound fish? I mean, obviously you made a life out of it in a way. I mean, not professionally, I might add, because you've been very successful outside of fishing, but carp fishing became your whole life, didn't it, to an extent?
Yeah, well, I've often said, and I think I've written about it recently, that a carp angler's born, and he's born with a disease, and like lots of people, you realise you've the disease once you start doing it. And I liken carp anglers to it being a lifetime thing. There's been times in my life when I've not been able to go carp fishing, but I've still been a carp angler.
Yeah.
And that's a fundamental shift. And I think that there's only really carp fishing that can do that. And I think it was Mr. Maddox that coined it carp fever. And I do like it
really
to a fever.
is.
And it is recently on the PB Products website, when I put the introduction, I put, hello, my name is Mark Holmes and I'm a carpaholic. Yeah. And that reality, like people who suffer from an addiction, I do believe that carp fishing is an addiction. Certainly when I started it was, and certainly the way I am now, and like I said, without getting all rose-tinted and sentimental, you know, we're 30 odd years down the line, and the fire still burns as brightly. As
strong as it ever did?
Without a doubt, John.
Yeah, I mean, what do you think in the old days? You mentioned, you know, Kevin Maddox, you know, and people like him. I mean, that was the era when you sold your telly to go fishing. What was all that about?
Well, I just think the thing is that very much like if you're at ground level when something starts to take off, you feel almost as though part of the growth, you're part of something. And undoubtedly, I got that spirit, and I got the reverse recognition from other anglers when they saw me carp fishing, that here was a guy who was a bit odd, because his tackle didn't look like mine, he never cast out, he hid behind trees, we hardly ever saw him, we didn't know he was there unless we stumbled upon him, he was a bit odd, but you got like a begrudging acknowledgement from other anglers that you were competent as an angler. Because the key shift is that people who carp fished in the early days and the birth of carp fishing had to really devise the tactics and certainly develop the tackle to meet the needs to catch them. And also, again, you know, not labouring the point with Kevin Maddox, but he was one of the first people at the time that, well, we had a laugh yesterday, didn't we, with the army jumper, camo trousers. I mean, he almost made it, didn't he, like a military operation in some respects. Some of my early pictures, and if you flash a picture up on this on this little interview,
the flat cap lads.
That's it. I wore a flat cap because I wanted to be like Bill Quinlan.
Yeah.
And I wore army gear because I wanted to be like Kevin Maddox. And I also, probably for the first 5 years of my carp fishing, I never looked at the camera.
Really?
I looked down at the fish, so people didn't know. There was like this ultra cultness that you know, it wasn't about
that
you.
Again.
It wasn't about the angler. It was the fish that people focused on.
Is that why people stare at fish? I've never understood that, because I generally, when I do manage to catch something, is smile because I'm happy.
Yeah, I think, to be fair, it's an era thing, and you know, like I said, I've always tried to be relative to the times.
Yeah.
But you can't change your history. I've always thought that the most important thing that looks nice is the fish rather than Mark Holmes. And you'll laugh, you know, in a former life I used to edit a magazine like you did, and I won't personalise it, but there were some angling people on the bank would comb their hair and groom themselves before we'd start taking photographs, and I never bought into that.
No.
I suppose when you're as old and ugly as me and you, then
well, we've had it, haven't we?
We've had it anyway. But
it's the truth. No, well, we're not pretty boys, are we? I mean,
well,
you know, it's too late for that.
It's, you know, I never have been really.
Who's
John.
your favourite boy band, as a matter of interest?
My favourite boy band? Well, you're going to get. You think I don't know, but I would probably think that it would be the Backstreet Boys.
Really?
Because I got married to their song "As Long as You Love Me."
Oh,
there you go.
How beautiful is that? That's lovely. So Mark, you're coming to the end of your school days. Did you really know what you wanted to do when you left school? Did you want to go back to Yorkshire?
For a while, and I thought you were saying I was coming to the end of my day.
There's plenty of life
I'm old,
in you.
but I'm not that old.
I fished with him last night. We're on a lake here, beautiful lake now. Got the rods out behind us. You're not that old, mate, are you?
No, I'm not that old. No. To be honest, we moved back from the south of England back to Yorkshire, and my mum died when I was quite young, and I won't have all the what are people crying on when they're watching this, but I had quite a traumatic childhood and stuff. But fishing kind of saved me, John. Yeah. So we went back to Yorkshire, and I had a lot of free time. I could really do what I wanted and all the rest of it, and so carp fishing was very much a great cul-de-sac for me to park myself.
Yeah.
And it kind of fitted into the way I was thinking at the time, which is I was a bit sulky, I was a bit moody, I was a typical.
And you can be on your own,
teenager.
can't you?
It was a solitary thing. Yeah. It was man against fish.
Yeah.
And it kind of carp fishing saved me from myself, but also allowed me to do all of those things.
Yeah. Well, that's good. I mean, I've often said it. I mean, we're just having a general chat about anything, but at one point in my life, I was quite interested in religion. I think we all have that little part of our journey, don't we?
Yeah.
And I remember saying to a friend of mine, no, I can't though, because I've already got my religion, and that's fishing.
Yeah.
Is that a strange thing to say? Or?
It's not. I mean, one of the things which I was very fortunate when I went back to Yorkshire is that, and he'll probably be embarrassed if he ever gets to watch this, but I started to correspond with Kevin Clifford.
Yeah.
And Kevin was a very well-known specialist angler at the time. He'd done particularly well with carp at Redmire Pool, and everybody knows what he caught. But he was an angler that went across the board, he caught big fish. But more importantly, it was pre-internet times and everything, pre-mobile. And I wrote to him asking for advice. And he was a blunt Yorkshireman from Hull, was Kevin. And he helped me tremendously by replying to me, sending me photographs. And I remember one of the things that sticks out in my mind the most was I asked him what the most important piece of fishing tackle was that I needed to catch big fish.
Yeah.
You know what he said, John?
No idea.
A car.
Really?
Because you'll catch nothing in Yorkshire. And
but things have changed.
Yeah, of course. But he was.
But he was right at the time,
wasn't he? He was blunt
he?
and he was to the point. But I was fortunate that because obviously I couldn't afford a car and I wasn't old enough to drive a car, I had to make use of what we had. And Yorkshire had one or two gems. And one of the waters that was spoken in hushed tones was a place called Chelladine.
Yeah.
And Chelladine had some of the biggest fish in Yorkshire. And I started pre-baiting that and I started fishing that. And from there now I went on to other famous Yorkshire waters like Leeds Knotford Lagoon, and of course I fished the Ullin District waters, and I such as the Motorway Pond, and then I moved on to places like Tylery, and I fished on Julian Cundy's playground like the Three Lakes and Drax Lake, and I was very, very lucky, John. I always had the knack to catch the big fish.
Yeah.
Everywhere I went, I caught the lake record at Queen Mary's Ponds in Ripon, and I caught the biggest fish out of the race course at Ripon, and I caught the biggest fish out of Drax. I caught the biggest fish out of Smiths in Bolton. Yeah. So I was very fortunate.
Well, but can I just stop you there? You started that piece by saying you're very lucky. No. Yeah, luck will take you so far. You go to one water, maybe catch the big one. You go to the second, maybe catch one. And even if you are, to use the word luck, very lucky, you might catch it. But when you consistently catch big fish, it's not luck.
Well, to be fair, I don't know who it was. I think it might have been Gary Player who said the more I practice, the luckier I get, or something like that. The reality is that I worked hard at it.
Yeah.
And some of the people that I am really in awe of in this carp world, there's one common denominator in most of their success, and that is hard work. And whether these guys are bait men, whether they are casters, whether they're location guys, whether they're stalkers, whatever sphere that they're very good in, the one common denominator is hard work. And I was the same. I realised that I might not have been the most gifted of people in relation to fishing, but I worked hard at it.
You worked hard.
And I'm very much like a sponge. I made sure that when I spoke to people that were far, far more competent than me and far, far more qualified than me, I listened to what they had to say.
Yeah.
And the one thing that God did bless me with is an elephant memory.
Yeah, of
and
course.
I remembered most of what they say. So when Kevin Clifford said this, or when he said that, and and you know, on my writing career, people
Yeah.
like Colin Dyson, they said various things and all the rest of it. I listened to what they had to
Yeah,
say, and I drank it in.
And drank it. And I remember my nan always saying to me, God bless her, she said you was given 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason.
Yeah, without a doubt.
And there's some truth in that, isn't there?
Without a doubt. But I always made sure that I caught fish, because one of the things which I always say to young lads when they ask me about catching big fish is that it's like anything. You can talk and talk and talk. You can read and read and read.
Yeah.
On the internet like this is going out on. You can watch and watch and watch. But the reality is, there is no substitute for doing it.
For doing it.
For being there, for doing it. You make mistakes, you cast in the trees, you lose fish, you tie bad rigs before you tie good rigs, you don't get your bait right before you get it right, you can't cast before you can cast. All of those come with being on the lake and fishing, and that's the one thing that I say to people. Don't just talk about it, do it.
And we always have this saying, don't we, you know, people can question your techniques, your setup, your mindset, your approach, anything. But at the end of the day with fishing, it's about one thing, it's about that.
Without
it's
a doubt.
About putting them fish on the bank. And however you do that, within the framework of what's acceptable, you know, and good sportsmanship, it doesn't matter, does it?
Without a doubt, John, that's why I've always been so driven at catching particularly individual fish, and you know, I was driven to that extent long before it became sort of a branch of the sport that was, to coin a phrase, bounty hunting. I always wanted to catch particular big fish, but I always did it in such a way that became my way of doing it.
Yeah, of course.
Now you've spoke lots and lots about it, and I'm a disciple of yours when it comes to this point. There is no one definitive way. The way that you do your fishing is your way.
Yeah.
And I would never stand up in, you know, I've done slideshows up and down the country for many, many years, and I never stand up and tell people that my way is the right way.
Yeah, sure.
You got to find your way, but what I'd say to you is be like a sponge. Take in what people have got to say, because they might just talk nonsense for 20 minutes, and then on minute 21 they'll say something that's relevant to where you are with your fishing and what's applicable. And you know, we're on a terminal tackle website, and this is exactly the point that I want to make. There are so many individual slants you can put on terminal tackle, but when you listen to people talk about terminal tackle, at some point in their comments they will come up with something that's applicable to your fishing, and the success of catching big fish has to come in you being able to identify, I need that particular hook arrangement, I need that particular link, I need that particular approach, I need that particular leader, it'll help me to get it down, blah blah blah. Loads of scenarios. That's what you should be looking for in your fishing.
Just a question for you now. This probably applies to me more than you, but do you ever go fishing? I don't know if it's an age thing with us now, Mark. Now we're cracking on a bit, but sometimes I almost feel like I get to the lake and I forgot how to tie something or do something, or I have to remember what order something goes. Do you find you have to do that? Just talking about the memory thing. I don't know if it's me and my dyslexia and things, but sometimes I'll sit there with a pile of gear and think, oh my God, how did I tie that?
Yeah, I think I liken it to being automatic mode, to be honest, John. And I think lots of anglers, particularly experienced anglers, go into automatic mode. So that, and that's why, and I often say to younger anglers, this guy's not being secretive, he's not being obtuse. He just can't explain why he does something. He knows he's done it because he's gone onto automatic pilot. So it's exactly when people talk about, why do you not use a marker float, Holmesy? I don't need to use a marker float because I'm able to cast a lead out, count it down. I'm able to feel on the retrieve of a single lead as to what I need to be doing. Yet I constantly see product placement and people talking about the importance of marker floats. There is a time and a place for marker floats, but I can tell you this, I could take a young kid under my wing and teach him about carp fishing and get him to catch some big fish, and he'd never need a spod and he'd never need a marker float.
I agree. I've never owned a spod or a marker. Same thing. Counting down the leads, depending on what weight of lead it is, you can tell the depth of water, what the features are. You can tell everything, can't you?
Yeah, you can.
But that's experience, isn't it?
It is experience, but this is why when we talk about tackle and we're talking about PB products and we're talking about their end tackle, one thing I do know is you need an hook. I've never caught a fish without an hook, John. I've never caught a fish without line. You know, so those things are vitally important.
Yeah, of course
and I
they are.
think that's the key in the commercial world that we live in. We've got to try and help people to understand what is a necessity in carp angling,
and what you don't
what's
need.
something that you don't need, or you might
Yeah.
need limited
Or
time.
something you've read from the latest
Exactly.
superstar who's just trying to sell a few bits of
Of
products.
course, of course.
Okay, before we move on, just let me ask you, the young Mark Holmes leaving, Newmarket Upper School, you went back to Yorkshire. Tell us a little bit about your career and how that developed.
My fishing career.
No, in terms of like your career that...
Well, to be fair, it sounds dreadfully boring, but a lot of people think that I'm some self-made guy and I've done all these fantastic and wonderful things. If I tell you that my first job, I was at that company for 18 years.
Yeah.
There was no get-rich scheme from Mark Holmes. I've never had a skill. I'm not technically minded. I'm not a joiner. I'm not a draftsman. The only skill that I have, if I have a skill, is being able to communicate with people. And basically, I worked at a company for 18 years.
Doing what, Mark?
I was in a textile game.
Textiles.
I was selling fabrics, and like everybody in that part of Yorkshire, the industry changed and people stopped making the fabric. They started buying it from abroad, and I used to buy it from abroad and I used to sell it. And one day I thought to myself, well, I'm buying something for £1, I'm selling it for £3. I really ought to be doing this myself.
Yeah.
And the rest is history, so to speak. I was very, very lucky. I had people that ran very large companies, household names. My biggest customer was always Burberry. Everybody will have heard of Burberry.
Yeah.
But a little fact is that the Burberry raincoat was manufactured in Yorkshire, in Castleford.
Right.
And would you believe I played rugby league for the son of the procurement director.
Really?
And he invited me back to his house one day after we'd played a game of rugby league. He played for a team called Lock Lane in Castleford.
Yeah.
And I played for Queensbury, that was in between Bradford and Halifax. And through that connection, I managed to get involved in selling my fabric to Burberry, and the rest is history. And I did that for about 10 years, and then I sold my company, started it from a back bedroom. When I left, I was employing 650 people in 3 different countries: Lithuania, Czech Republic, and the UK. I sold it to an American company, and then I then trained as a journalist, became a qualified journalist and a photographer.
Do you mind me asking what it was turning over? As soon as it was something that started from your back bedroom, I think that's quite interesting.
Well, in 1998, it was turning over 6 million. After the first year, I turned over 6 million. And when I sold the company, I was turning over 29 million.
29 million?
Yeah.
29 million from your back bedroom?
Yeah, it was, but it was, I was extremely fortunate. I'm a great believer that opportunity is a bus that drives past everybody. And if you're lucky to be stood at a bus stop, you can get on it, John.
Yeah.
There's many thousands of people that bus just goes past them and they're not stood at the bus stop. And a clever man is
that simple.
A clever man is the one who stood at a bus stop and knows is to get on it.
Yeah.
Likewise, I knew how to get off it, not at the terminus.
Yeah, not at the terminus.
I had to get off at it at
en
the right
route,
time.
At the right time.
On route, yeah.
Well, that's part 1 of Inside the Mind with Mark Holmes. Join us in part 2 when hopefully we'll reveal some real secrets, possibly about the trade.
The angling trade?
Not the textiles. We'll see you then.